Coming up next on Public Access TV is Fan to Fan, the book game. My guest today is Natick author and principal of Walk Boston History, Mitch Lapin, to tell us about his new book, now available on Kindle, called Arlington Sanctum, a novel that touches upon the always relevant issue of the ethical decisions facing those who wear military uniforms. Stay tuned. This tour may take you back to Vietnam amidst the fog of war. Welcome to Fan, the book game. I'm your host, Dave Hornfischer. Today I'm pleased to welcome a fellow Eastern Mass senior softball player, but more importantly, a Boston historical walking tour operator and now author, Mitch Lapin, to talk about his new historical novel, Arlington Sanctum, a Vietnam-related story involving two Vietnam veterans and an anthropologist. Mitch, welcome to Fan here, the book game as we call it, not the softball game. But before we get to the book, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself and your Boston walking tour business?
Okay, David, I came up here when I was 25 years old from Philadelphia, another historical town, and I worked in business here. I was educated as a teacher. Unfortunately, the school system in Philadelphia was going on strike, so I stayed in business and found myself working in business. And after 36 years with the same company, I decided that I needed a second career as I looked forward to retirement. Everybody said to me, you gotta have a plan, you gotta have a plan. The only thing I could think of is that I loved history. I needed to do something with that. So I figured it had to be something like tour guiding, and I happened to take a tour with a historian, a master's degree from Northeastern University, loved what he was doing, and I said, can I help you? Can I do anything for you? And he basically said, no, don't need any help. So I left him my contact information, and he called me a year later.
Oh, really?
And he says, hey, come on over, you'll help me when I have overage. So if he had two buses, I would take one bus and I would learn along the way. That got me into it. Then I decided that I needed a script, which he wasn't giving me. I had to listen to him and write my notes and try and catch up and then be behind him always on the same page, same timetable. So I started writing scripts and I put them online on the internet. I called it walkbostonhistory.com. And so that I started to write and write. I said, hey, I don't know, this is looking pretty good. My wife is a reference librarian. She'll be my editor. Let's try a book. And I came up with this idea to write the book, the Arlington Sanctum.
But before you did that, you had this guide from the tours. Did you sell the guide at all? Or was that published, or was that
the self-guided book tours I published after this?
Okay.
So I was doing walking tours at first, and then a company called VoiceMap came to me and said, how would you like to do a self-guided walking tour on the smartphone? And I said, okay, I'll get back to you in November, and we started working on this. First one took me 3 months to do. The worst part for me was actually doing the voice, actually talking into a microphone and recording it. Finally did that, and I recorded the Freedom Trail Tour in the footsteps of Paul Revere.
Okay.
In doing my writing, I learned that he's terribly underappreciated, so I emphasized Paul Revere on my Freedom Trail tours. I actually did some research at the Mass Historical Society, and I discovered something about Paul that no one else knew about. For 5 years, he was the coroner of Boston, investigating untimely, unexplained deaths. I published that, first person ever to publish 46 different inquests that he did about that. And that got me going. And I took some seminars at the Mass Historical Society on the Boston Massacre. So I made that into a tour. Everybody thinks it was one event in the evening, but it took 18 months to build up to that when the British first invaded Boston. So that I booked into a tour, and there's 2 very interesting murders and 3 very interesting trials that took place in those days, and nobody seems to know about that. So that's part of a walking tour, and now also a smartphone app where you can walk on your own at your own pace whenever you want.
So do you do these all year round through the winter and everything?
Well, yeah, I sort of quiet down around November when it gets colder.
Yeah.
But the phone, on your phone, you can take it anytime you want, which is one of the convenient things about that. And not only that, when you buy the actual phone app from me, it's good for life. You can come back and do it 5 years later, it's still good.
And so, yeah, So so that's a self guide that you can do, and then the other tours are. So how does one find out about this? Does one just look up Mitch Lapin or Tour Boston?
If you look up Mitch Lapin, yes, or Walk Boston History on the internet.
Walk Boston History.
Or if you go to the production people, voicemap.me,
okay,
they will have all Boston tours, not just mine there.
Okay.
And by the way, I just finished one more, the Boston Civil War tour, walking tour.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm.
Very underappreciated. People don't understand the enormous contribution we made to the Civil War. Over 120 regiments marched, and the first 4 deaths in the Civil War were the 6th Massachusetts Regiment, which was going to protect the Capitol when President Lincoln called to arms just after Fort Sumter. So there's a lot about the Civil War that you can appreciate, and of course, a lot of abolitionists.
A lot of rich history here. So then, you get during all this tour business and this history. Let's talk about how that led you to writing this Vietnam-related book about war heroes.
David actually had nothing to do with it, actually.
Okay.
The reason I went to the book is I was down in Washington, D.C. in 1984 at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and they opened it up. And they had something like a safe deposit box that they put in there. And I thought, well, okay, it was interesting I did that. And I let it go, and then in 1998, I heard in national news, that they opened up the new Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and pulled that individual back out because it was learned that he was misidentified as unknown but to God. And so it's a long story that went back to Vietnam when he was shot down in 1972. And
this all gets into the book.
All goes into the book. And so I thought, that's kind of strange. I want to know more. Why did they misidentify him? And I could give you that answer if we have time. But I wanted to actually understand the entire process of finding an MIA. I'm not sure if I wanted to actually go on a trip and travel with some of these private companies, but I was interested.
A new kind of tour group.
Yeah, I can run a tour group. It's almost getting that bad today. But, yeah. And it turned out that the private organizations were doing more to find missing in action than the U.S. government.
Really?
So that's where I started into this.
And so the title Arlington Sanctum then came from the Arlington Cemetery. And sanctum, the meaning of that in this context?
The meaning of sanctum is something science fiction. You know, I'm wanting to sort of let you know this is not total fact, but it is based on the generic way you go approach finding an MIA, and what happened to make that MIA lost.
So your book here brings to life people lost in the so-called fog of war, I guess. And the promo, I'm just reading from that here. It says, you transport them to the 6th dimension beneath the tomb of the unknown soldier, compelling the recovered unknowns to examine the forces that created their MIA status. Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. Well, let's clarify how I transport. They're holograms. So we find basically the remains and use DNA to make an electronic version of them.
Is that possible to do?
It is today, possibly.
Really?
Yes,
Yeah.
It is. Well, with artificial intelligence, it's a scary thing coming at us, but I got there first. But so we do that, and we bring them back to the Arlington National Cemetery below to the Sanctum, where there's a vault. And they're there for 90 days, in which they have to document their military history, on the theory that they're going to get out from there and go and be interred in a normal place.
They will no longer be unknown.
Yeah, no longer be unknown, and it does happen. In fact, there is actually in my research in doing this book, there's actually one individual, Edward Alexander, who fought in the Civil War, my wife and I, who is a reference librarian, we discovered him, and we found now that he wasn't lost at the Battle of Antietam. We actually followed him 45 days later and found that he died in a hospital in Fredericks, Maryland. So we brought that to the attention of all those who had declared him as missing in action. That came up accidentally. It was a great find. And I don't think I'll ever get anything better than that.
But the focus of this book is all on Asian and...
it takes place there in Asia, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam.
And that war, I guess we can call it a war. You mentioned to me the Vietnamese call it the American War.
Yes.
Call it the Vietnam War, I guess.
Yeah.
But that raised a lot of ethical decisions that soldiers have had to make while wearing a military uniform. And I mean, that's relevant in every war, I guess. But
well, I wanted to actually run through it. myself. I've been fighting this issue all my life, and I wanted to put it in writing and solidify my approach to it. And if you look at Bill Bradley, who's the principal of the book, chapter 20 is all about Bill Bradley's early years, which are almost identical to mine. So he's actually going through what I went through about Vietnam. Just before I decided to enlist, and I didn't go that far, I stopped. So I've always wondered myself, should I have gone further? And so that's where, you know, he makes a major decision on his resume in the 90-day period as to what he will do, where he stands, whether or not he listened too much to the powers that be or should have resisted.
Yeah, that was, you know, that's a huge issue for our generation. I mean, I was fortunate that I didn't have to go either, because it wasn't for anything I did. I just got exemptions all the way through, as if my father was writing the rules and he wasn't. And you know, we had college things, parental things, a variety of reasons why a lot of us didn't have to go. And when you hear these stories, it does make you wonder about the issues people faced when.
Well, the numbers are really hard to accept now that I know them all. 22 billion Americans were like me. They had an exemption.
Yeah.
850,000 went to fight in Vietnam. They didn't. Over 100,000 actually resisted, and another 110,000 left the country.
Wow.
So there were other actions that maybe I should have taken or could have taken, and I used Bill Bradley to address that.
So in this book, Bradley's a young soldier who actually ends up dying in Vietnam, and I guess this probably comes back to the unknown soldier status, right? And then you also have a master sergeant, a Vietnam soldier himself, or a veteran who'd been through it all, and an anthropologist. So that sounds like a lot like some pretty serious author work to blend all this together.
Well, maybe I don't know how well I've done it. You know, I'm still looking for a lot of feedback. But the sergeant major is the typical sergeant major in the U.S. military. He's typical of a Marine. The anthropologist helps us understand the technology involved today or back then on how to find missing in action when you have nothing else to go on. And so she actually will describe to us how technically you go find someone missing if you have a target. And Sergeant Major takes us back to the World War II, brings them forward into Korea, and then he runs the actual sanctum below the Arlington National Cemetery. He's in charge of making it work.
Okay.
So he's a hologram, but that's his function.
Oh, okay. And then the anthropologist?
Yeah, she's a Korean American. Her mother was from Korea, and her family is from both North and South Korea. So I actually get her back into North Korea looking for missing in action. There are 8,500 Americans still missing in action in Korea.
Wow.
And once she gets in, that's easy. Trying to get out is the hard part. So she comes up at the end of the book, and she's going to transition us into the second book if I ever get to write it.
So we talked about a lot of these, this really being more of an Asian story in many ways, you said, than just a pure Vietnam story, I guess.
Yeah.
Because the issues kind of involve a lot of the wars over the years.
Well, one common theme of most of these three Asian countries is that they believe in the hereafter.
The three countries being?
Korea, Japan, and Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
And it might be true of all the others as well, but they believe in the hereafter, and she does. And so she serves the purpose of suggesting that a hologram might be the future, and it might be.
It'll bring these people really back to life then, and
back to a hologram.
Back to a hologram, even the unknowns.
So we talk about in the book, if you were blind, would you rather be a hologram and you're able to see, or be blind as a human being? So there's all kinds of things that could come out in the future that meld together.
And the so-called human spirit that never passes away, right?
Right. Well, not if you believe in the hereafter, right?
Yeah, right.
Right.
So this really touches on a lot of issues. How long did it take you to write this?
Let's see, 10 years?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it took me 3 years to
go back to when you took the tour, I guess.
Yeah, it did go back to that, and then anticipating my retirement from my other company. So it's been that long.
So have you had any surprises or things that came up as you went along that really kind of you weren't anticipating as you got in there? You obviously had to do some research, I would assume, as you were doing this.
Well, I think the one surprise is the number of missing in action that there are in this world. In our wars of the 20th century, it's 100,000. In World War I in Verdun, there is 130,000 skeletons still waiting for identification. It's an incredible story.
Oh.
When I went to Flanders Field, battlefield called Ypres, they were still pulling up ammunition from the battlefield in 2016.
Yeah.
And they just put it on the side of the road for some army guy to come pick it up and take it away. So that is a surprise.
There was a story in the paper today about some armaments found down in South Carolina, I think, from the Civil War.
Well, yeah, it wasn't too long ago they found a submarine, didn't they?
Yeah,
The first submarine, yeah.
And so the concept of the unknown soldier is an interesting one. Did you get into the history of that a little bit?
Yeah, it started in 1926, and they actually brought back a whole number of World War I veterans that they lost, and they selected 4 for some reason, and they asked the congressman to come by and pick one, and he picked one, and that was the first to go in. And so they will do this quite often. They will find 4 and select one to go into the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. The rest will go into Arlington National Cemetery to another tomb. I mean, there's a vault there for the Vietnam unknowns, other than the one gentleman that went in to the actual tomb. And then there's another vault that has 2,111 Civil War veterans they can't identify. And they still want to. They still want to go through the process. And they're incredibly far behind.
And then and then mistakes get made.
Yes, the gentleman that declared Michael Blassie, the 1972 Air Force pilot, as unknown, made a mistake, and he's no longer with them. But he was overworked and using World War II tactics to determine who he was working on.
And so what do they do when they uncover the mistake? Do they?
Well, they
then create a tomb for the person when they discover who he really was.
They'll set him aside to discover who he was, and if he's one of the 4 that are, he'll be in the 4 selection process. If he happens to be the one that gets selected, he goes in. Otherwise, he goes to the tomb on the side, the unofficial tomb. So,
well, I mean, this was just a long-term. So after putting all this together, and were you writing this as it went along, or did you all of a sudden in the last couple of years decide you're going to put the final piece together?
I would say that I did a lot of writing, and then over the last 2 or 3 years, I finally started to smooth it out and gloss it up, and check my numbers and make sure the facts were correct.
So then, how do you get it onto Kindle? Or how do you print a real book even? This is just on Kindle right now.
This is right now on Kindle, on Barnes & Nobles, on Kobe and Rakuten, and about 10 other sites.
There's a picture of the ad on Kindle on Amazon. Right.
There is one interesting site called Draft 2 Digital, Draft number 2 to Digital, that books you on all e-book sites simultaneously. Not all, but 10 or so. Does it real smoothly, does it at once, as does Kindle and Amazon. They're pretty easy, and so is Barnes & Noble, pretty easy. And once you have it cleaned up, it goes right on. They do review it, and they tell you if you made any typos or spelling mistakes, and you come back and you gloss it over and say, go ahead, publish.
So you get a little bit of editing, and do you have to pay for this?
No, you don't. You don't have to pay for it. For a paperback, it's going to be a different story. Whether you want 200 copies, you may have to pay $199 to get it going.
Okay.
Or if you want print on demand, it might be another $300 or $400, and then they don't print the book until someone buys it. That's there.
Are there photos in the book that have to be?
In my case, not many photos. I would like to add photos. Yeah. That's something I might actually do later.
Picture of a hologram somehow would be fascinating.
Yeah. Of me.
And then the cover design, did they help you with that a little bit?
Yes, they do. They have generic cover designs you can choose. So my cover design is the canopy of the jungle. See that leaf there?
Yeah. Kind of looks like a big spider web almost.
So I talk about the canopy many, many times in my book, and how it affected the missing status of the individual, how it affected his time and his troubles going through combat. So I chose that as the actual cover of the book, and that's generic.
Yeah. And then you talked about your that you've got, this is leading you into now a second book, and maybe more.
Yeah.
Do you see a series coming out of this?
No, I don't know.
Do you like the characters enough to?
Maybe
they
one
can-
more.
yeah.
Maybe one more.
Okay.
It's going to take me 10 years to do.
Oh no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
The second one should be easier.
The second one's a couple people are going to escape from the Arlington Sanctum and go out on their own. And I won't tell you. I won't tell the audience exactly who.
Okay. We'll have to have you back again in another in 10 more years.
I hope so.
guess.
I hope so.
10 more years. Yeah. So what are some of the lessons that you kind of learned from doing a book like this?
One, the lesson is you better have a reference librarian as your wife. She was so helpful, and she was correcting my English every step along the way, and that was great. I guess the other lesson is that I didn't really do an outline at first. I just kept flowing and writing, and I found myself out of sequence, out of place. So a good outline, spend the time to do a good outline first.
Timeline and
Or at least know where you're going, where you're starting from, where you're going to finish. A timeline or what objectives you wish to achieve, and it'll probably help you keep things in sequence. And I was trying to go in chronological order, and I didn't do it well at first.
Yeah.
Found myself coming back at a certain point and talking about something that I had.
Well, a lot of books have flashbacks that start at the end and come back to the beginning. And
yeah, I wasn't really doing flashbacks. I was just, where the ethical issues came up, I was just repeating myself, and I said, well, I don't need to do that here. So a lot of extra writing because I didn't have that outline.
so were there some issues in this that related to yourself? Did you make the characters in your own image in some ways?
Well, yeah, Bill Bradley's myself. I mean,
he faces the issues you faced
He faced
when
exactly.
you were thinking about what might have happened to you.
Yeah. And what I do is that I don't talk about his past until I get to chapter 20. At some time now, he's already dead. He's already back in the Sanctum, and Jake Merlot wants to know more about him, and so we go into his past, and that's basically what I went through in my life. So that was, I don't know if that was the intent, but that's what came out.
Yeah, so the whole tour aspect of connecting your tour business to this, you said there wasn't really a connection to it, but I think a fascination with history is
absolutely.
You've probably always been fascinated. You weren't a history major in school or anything, were you?
No, I was a marketing education teacher, but I always loved history, and I could never understand in high school, junior high school, why the history teachers got so beat up by the audience, the other students, that they didn't want to listen. To me, it was always in me. I always wanted to hear it.
Yeah, and as far as as a retirement, somebody told me once that if you retire when you're young enough, you will find other new ventures. It sounds like the travel business and now this book have been sort of an example of that for you, besides senior softball.
No.
I mean,
like all my friends and your friends said, you have to have a plan before you retire to make it work.
But you weren't thinking of a book when you retired.
No, that came after the tour, guys. Yeah.
And it was sort of inspired though by your love of history and I mean there's just so much history, and this is a history that's misunderstood by so many Americans too.
And especially the Korean War. They call it the Lost War.
Right.
Yeah.
So does your book touch on the Korean War?
Oh,
a little
yeah,
bit?
yeah.
Well, the Master Sergeant, I guess.
He's part of that, and then
he had a World War II connection too.
Yeah,
right?
the anthropologist gets deep into the Korean War when she goes searching in North Korea for the missing in actions there.
Okay.
8,500 missing Americans.
So was there a certain amount of technology that you had to kind of research and learn a little bit about?
I took a DNA course over at Regis College so that I would understand that better. And the technology you can learn online. There's a bunch of institutes out there that talk to you about how to find those missing in action, how to find missing people. And I studied that on the internet as best I could, and I introduced all those concepts into the book as Catherine, the anthropologist, worked through the book to get things done.
So how long of a book would this be if it was printed? Would it be 200 pages?
It depends on the format, 265 to maybe 313. Interesting, I put in my introduction, this is the perfect book for a cross-country or cross-ocean read. 6 hours you can read the book. Yeah.
And so are there some skills, some ideas, some formatting issues that you use? Some authors that I talk to say they like to have short chapters. Some people like to keep it punchy. When you're the editor, did you have some suggestions that made to you about that, or?
Oh, well, I don't know if I can preach to them because they're they're so good at it, better than me. I just fell into this. But my
Yeah.
first chapter is 3 paragraphs.
Okay.
It just sets the scene.
It's just punchy. Yeah. Okay.
And
yeah.
then I don't have many like that. Some of them get pretty long.
So the story itself kind of flows over how long of a period? Is it?
1966 to 2004.
Okay, so that's a long period.
Yeah.
And so these guys are dying in the war, which is in the 60s, and the discoveries are happening decades later, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And at a time in which there's new technologies to
Right.
understand that, right? And
Right.
So there's a kind of a look back at why the mistakes were made earlier,
Yeah.
and
And the interesting thing, like in case of Bill Bradley, you have to educate him as to what has transpired since, to help him feel confident that we're doing what we're doing for his best interests. You have to bring him up to speed on 30 years of the development of the United States, and the possibility that, yeah, you're a hologram, this is a real thing. And, you're in the Arlington Sanctum, and this is where you're going to be. You're not getting out of here.
Bill Bradley was him.
Bill Bradley is the main character.
He was a basketball player. And
that's true. That's true. Very, very good
Is
one.
there any reason you chose that name?
No.
No.
Oh, yes, there is. There is actually. At St. Regis, there was a good historian that conducted history courses, and his name was Bill Bradley. He passed away.
Okay.
So I did that.
Oh. Well, Mitch, this has been fascinating, as is always the case on this show. The 28 minutes kind of flies by. Are there one or two things that I perhaps should have asked you about that you didn't get a chance to?
No, I just, I know you want to help out those who are trying to publish. If you wish to go to an audiobook, today they have synthetic voices that will narrate your whole book. So I thought about 265 pages. I have to narrate that to make it into an audiobook. Right. I'm not going there, but I'll probably use a synthetic voice, and it's very cheap.
Comes right out of AI then, right?
Yeah. And it sounds pretty decent. I haven't done my whole book, so I can't tell what it sounds like in the end, but it was like $24 for 12 hours of synthetic narration. Mm-hmm. That's dirt cheap.
Wow.
And if you I did price what it would take to have a real person do it, a trained professional. It was $1,800.
Okay.
So that's a good tip.
Well, great. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. Anything about the Vietnam War is just has such a broad range of issues that it brings up. Historic, moral issues, financial issues probably, and political ones certainly. But I think this is great. I think that I've never been I haven't got in myself into the idea of Kindle books yet. I tried and I didn't find. I find I like a piece of paper for some reason. I guess I'm just showing my age, But anyway, for those of you who are out in TV land, go on to Kindle, look up the Arlington Sanctum. It's there. It's a lot cheaper than buying a hardcover, probably, and I think you'll find it fascinating. And I hope that this discussion today has encouraged people to look into this, because there's a lot in this book, and I think I might have to reconsider my own Kindle business and check this out. But Mitch, you're a great guest, and fans out there, come back and watch Fan to Fan, the book game, on Access Framingham TV. We're on the cable stations Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 8:30 p.m. and Saturday mornings at 7:30. So check us out, and this show will also be up on YouTube if you happen to only catch the end of it someday. So, Mitch, thanks so much for being with us, and stay tuned, folks.